Welcome everybody to the AIMS webinar about linked open data enabled bibliographic data. This webinar will be unfortunately only presented today by Marcha Zeng from Kent State University because our colleague Imma Subirats cannot join us. Yes, as usual, the webinar will take around 1 hour. The presentation will take around 20 minutes, and afterwards we have around 40 minutes for a discussion round, where of course you are invited to ask all your questions. I also want to inform you that this webinar will be recorded, so you have the opportunity to watch the presentation again after the webinar is closed. Okay, I think we can start now, Marcha. Please go ahead.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Today, Imma will not be here, so I will be the only one present this webinar. We hope that the webinar will provide some useful information in producing linked open data enabled bibliographical data. Okay. Here I will need to give you a little bit background of how the recommendation came out. The LODE-BD recommendation were first prepared under the umbrella of VOA 3R, as you can see, WAR 3R. It's an European research consortium. At the beginning of the project, there were 8 repositories from 13 countries, and their data were collected from 17 institutions. So their task is to turn the bibliographical data from an in-house local database into a standardized repository in WAR3R. Secondly, hopefully those will become also linked data. So in order to provide them some set of recommendations, FAO created this LODE-BD report, aiming to support the selection of appropriate encoding strategies for producing meaningful data, to producing linked open data enabled data. So the version 1.0 was for this particular consortia, but 2.0 of the recommendations already went beyond agriculture and took off the agriculture-related specific metadata terms. So now everyone can use it. This is an illustration of the situation. As you can see that we put the data providers, the variety of data providers, they would like to go through one simple common platform to share the data. In the older ways, they would have just used the OAI protocol, which adopted simple doubling core. But now first of all, the data providers felt that their data richer than the 15 elements can describe. And secondly, because the linked open data and semantic web movement, now the metadata terms defined by schemas have constraints, and how you deal with them, how to understand them. And also now the metadata emphasize a lot more on the relations, on interlinking, rather than just description. So the questions from the data providers are, of course, everyone have that questions. First, what metadata standard to follow? We can see that there are so many metadata standards. Which schema we can use? And also, what is the minimum set of properties to include? And also, do we have any model that everyone can agree on? Because the new constraints that applied to metadata schemas, people also had to question what data values to provide. Can I just put plain text string, or I have to use a URI for non-literal to encode my author, my publisher, subject terms? So another question is there any way we can encode our data now and make it ready to move from a local database to a linked data dataset? But we collected the data dictionaries from all of them, and we found that after taking a look at the data dictionaries and a survey analysis, we found that everyone used an ad hoc in-house format for their data structure. This is probably very common in data repositories. Just for this responsible body related information that I share on this screen, you can see that there are almost no agreement to how to code the creator that as a person or as a corporate body. Every repository has their own way that already encoded their data in their thousands of records. So we believe that a conceptual model would help to establish an overall picture of involving entities and relationships in the descriptions. So in a broader context, we think that the use of a similar conceptual model among data providers should help foster a common understanding of the involving data models. Therefore, LODE-BD uses a simple conceptual model based on three entities. As you can see, resource, agent, and schema. Major relations can be identified between a resource instance, for example, an article or report, and the agent, for example, a person or research team that are responsible for the creation of the content and the dissemination of the resource, as well as the themas, which means the things that being the subjects or topics of a resource. And this terminology and the idea was based on a Ifla-Ferber family model. The next screen gives you some more details. As you can see that we have the on the right side a lot more details, and everyone can extend as needed. The model provides sufficient capability for those data providers to present their content and to share. So the model emphasizes on the first, the basic entities and the relationships, as I explained to you, resource, agent, and thema. Secondly, the relationship between instances of the same entity. And third is relationship between instances of different entities. So assuming you have a rich bibliographic data in your repository, so this is like a walkthrough to how to prepare the data for linked open data related or ready bibliographical data. So now we come to the second step after the model. They map your data field to the LODE-BD chunks and properties. And the background is a basic original from FAO Open Archive. You can see there are several things related to title. So for this information, we will map to a group to say title information. By this way, we can analyze different kind of original data fields and put them into the chunks that are prepared. So we built 9 chunks of properties. For example, many of you are familiar with that. Title, information, responsible body, those are not new. And we also have a relation between documents or between agents. It's another chunk of the property we prepared. All of this were explained in more detail in a particular recommendation which called Meaningful Bibliographical Metadata M2B, and you can find the details there. In all the chunks or groups, as you can see that it's like a backbone of the later when we talk about the crosswalks and recommended practices. We use the chunks group the properties there and emphasize what are the mandatory or highly recommended or optional that apply to different situations. Because, for example, if you have a proceedings or a collected reports, some place may choose to treat that as a whole publication and not go into the detailed individual paper. So at a different point, we recommend you what should be included in the property and how the value should be controlled if it's, for example, creator, and what are the important attributes there. These are all applied to 9 groups that in the M2B. These 9 groups give us the background of presenting our next part, which are the decision trees based on the 9 groups. For example, this is one decision tree that shows for the title information. Starting from the properties that describe resource instance, each of this kind of flowchart presents decision points and gives a step-by-step solution to a given problem of metadata encoding. A data provider can highlight decision paths and make the metadata terms to be used at the very end bottom of the chart. Here we start with a title of a resource. If you want to have different types of title, you will end up at the right side. You can see here, yes, no, right side. And then you say, okay, I would like to differentiate that. Then we say for title and subtitle, you choose the decision 1C, which would use DC terms title. For the rest of the titles, you ended with another different place, right? Okay, so this may be a little bit abstract. So we provided for each decision tree a text-based explanation corresponding to each of the flowchart with notes, steps, and examples. So on the top, you can see that putting the decisions following the question like do you have a title? Do you want differentiated title? And then you get the answer and the action number corresponding to the decisions with the metadata terms and examples. Let's see a detailed chart of this one. Okay. So you can see the examples when I provide for title, encoding as DC terms, title, and then the example, what the value should be. This one is pretty straightforward because the titles are not controlled and they're free text. But for the creator information, this one will be a little bit different. We start with create information, and the first question asked is whether you have authority file. If there's no authority file, then you go to the left side. But if you have authority file, you already applied authority names in your description, the second question would be, is the authority data available as linked data? Did you already put on the URI behind each name, each author names that you control? If yes, then you should end it with encoding using the URI that represent that creator. This is very important to note at the ending type point. Typically, previously we used just literally anything, a string, text string. But now if you have URI representing a value which is representing an entity, you should use the URI. So this is a very important step beyond the regular just merge, standardize a repository, because you prepare your data to become linked data. So back to the previous one, you can see that at the bottom, two of them, one is called DC creator, DC:creator, which use the metadata from the legacy Dublin core 15 element set. The second one is DC terms creator. You will say, well, they both are creator, why they're different, and why one ended with a string, one ended with URI. Well, this is what we were trying to do. We were looking at Dublin core terms, which has defined properties with the constraints. For example, some properties like this 2.2 terms of the term namespace used only with non-literal values. Some others used for literal values. Literally, you can put anything, and some can be both. But so many elements that define like this and take time to understand. One, I choose subject as DC: or DC terms: which namespace to use. So LODE-BD went a step ahead to interpret them, incorporate them into the decision trees. So we have the creator, like we said, the decision goes on. Let's see the more detailed one. If we use the authority file, of course, then we can use DC creator. And if it's here 1B, here shows you the difference. If the authority data available as linked data, we use DC terms creator, and instead of putting the authority form, the labels as creator, you use the URI of them. So LODE-BD gives you, based on decision, what metadata term you should use, and then the examples. Yeah, in the middle part, you can see the decision showing you how to tell what you have been done. Okay, this is another example. This example shows you that sometimes there are more than one properties you can use. For example, when we describe a note or summary, it can be abstracts, table of contents, or general description. So sometimes there are more than one element provided here. As a data provider, you go through decision tree, you mark on your data field what elements should be used. Okay. All the decision trees are available on the website. You can download the PDF as well. And we also created a crosswalk to show all the data terms. For example, we get into responsible body here. The gray, this part, the white colored part, are doubling quote based. Doubling quote, simple doubling quote based property you can use, or the doubling quote metadata terms, the one that constrains elements or properties that you should use. In addition to that, we also give the details, some from Bib or ontology. So some richer metadata can use more detailed elements. Since schema.org came out, as you know, the schema.org provided by the search engines like Yahoo, Google, and Bing, we made a map to schema.org terms. So if webmasters want to embed those properties in their web page markup, they can directly use this table to do the markup. By this way, their web page will have more semantically meaningful markup, and search engines can understand them because you use schema.org properties. Okay. So what the LODE-BD methodology was, starting with various data dictionary and sample records. Then we came up with 9 chunks of properties and created this to be 9 chunks explanation, and also many decision trees, and show different scenarios for the webmasters or data providers. They can walk through each of them and mark exactly what kind of data they want to provide, and also how to encode them with metadata terms that came from standardized well-used schemas. But then how you implement? So we provided, we thought about 2 options. Option 1, for providers who may decide that this is a design time strategy, which means I go back and change my current model to use this good practice recommended by LODE-BD. But what this means is that you may have to change your database and the services that access it. This may require a lot of re-engineering, and if you already have a huge data repository, you may want to consider whether this is appropriate. The second strategy is called a runtime strategy, which means you still keep your original, but you convert on the fly to a good practice model based on the requirement. So for this one, which you need to have a conversion service. So there's two different strategies, approaches that one can consider. Then we can output our data, of course. After you did that, either change your original data structure or make a converting. Then you output the record to the metadata repository. The repository itself, like a Wall3R, can provide search browse for general things. They can also make it available output together from the repository to linked open data. But for yourself, another option is your data can directly output and make available as RDF graphs and make into linked open data set. One of the example is the FAO Open Agris. If you haven't visited, you can visit Open Agris and see how their bibliographical data become linked open data descriptions. So this is all the LODE-BD information. And in general, what we want to do is to promote the use of well-established metadata standard. The Dublin Core, Dublin DCMI terms, peoples, and other common standards, as well as schema.org. Those are the ones we chose to include in this recommendation. Secondly, back to the practice. It's very important. It's actually probably the basic step that we need to use authoritative data, use controlled vocabularies, and use standardized syntax encoding. For example, for your date time, for language, we need to use controlled vocabulary for all, even those particular part of the data. Also, it's important to consider your resource as describing different kind of things, making the things linkable and acceptable. Instead of you're describing and using and providing hyperlinks or strings. Okay, so this important idea of things instead of strings, it's very basic in the LODE-BD recommendation. The resource URIs as data values should be encouraged to use. And the purpose of this we all have is for exchange and reuse. Right? And we also want to keep this as a reference that is open for suggestions for new properties and metadata terms according to the needs. In the you can find the recommendation 2.0 online at the FAO website. There are also lists of references regarding publishing and consuming linked data, and regarding where you can find vocabularies, where you can find linkable sets. And in practice, I also put a C also here that you may consult the linked data version of AgriVoc. This is the thesaurus of FAO. It gives you an idea of how a thesaurus can become linked data and also mapped to other linked data vocabularies. The Open Agris I mentioned to you before is the bibliographical data set. It's already released as linked open data, and they do the mashup on the fly, and it's very creative and exciting. And the three of this together, you actually find a path to change your original local data repository into a linked open data enabled data set. And this is all my presentation, and thank you. And I could start with the question and discussion. Okay.
Yes, thank you very much, Marcia. I think this was a very interesting presentation.